Hi everyone, delonewolf here, and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. In the news, well, pretty interesting. CCP did come out with some more update news, and well, a little bit of surprise, but they are going to change the interdiction nullification, so bubble immunity and the warp core stabilizers, and they both will basically become a low slot. That's an active module that gives you the immunity or the added warp core strength for like around a 15-second window, and then it's got a very long cooldown of like around 2 minutes or something like that, so it'll become like a tactical thing, but the bubble immunity does come to a lot more ships all of a sudden. So yeah, I'm still thinking about the potential of these changes and potential problems for these changes. I would personally highly recommend that if you fly nullified ships, if you find yourself in these situations, or if you fly ships that have the warp core stabilizers and all of that sort of stuff, right, if this interacts with your playstyle, definitely head over to the test server to CC, take a look at it, try some fits, try some ships, give it a little bit of testing, not only for bugs but also for feedback on potential problems for that feature, because to me it does seem like it looks like a small thing, but it could really have a very big impact on some playstyles in EVE Online. So definitely worth, I think, a little bit of time for players that are in the know to have some good testing there and to try to give positive feedback, or try to give feedback, objective feedback, I would say, to CCP that they can incorporate. Next to that, for me personally, not that much news, except, maybe I'll quickly mention that the update does, at first glance, feel like a pretty big nerf to Tech 3 cruisers again, because basically one of their subsystems is, well, taking quite a beating. The nullification doesn't just become part of the hull anymore, and as a result, a little bit of speculation is what I've seen on potentially changes coming to the Tech 3 cruisers. So we will see how all of that plays out. Next up, let's take a quick look at the New Eden store, see what's happening over here. I know that there's like sort of a plex sale going on as well. The 18 plex sale is also still going on here. This time it's the Loki battle scar skin that's only costing 18 plex. If you kept a close eye on that, and if skins are your thing, then you could have definitely grabbed a couple at a pretty cheap price. And then for the services, we have, that's just bundles, 12-month Omega for 5,500 plex. Is that, could you consider that a sale? I don't think so. It doesn't show up as a sale. It's just, pay 11 months and you get 12 months. That's sort of like a package deal. So not spotting anything too special, but I think, if you buy straight from CCP, that you do get, at the moment, a deal for Plex as well. Anyways, let's get to the market, which is why everyone is here, of course, and we will start at 320. Like that. All right, let's get into some plex and stuff, and you can probably already tell from the ticker that the average price is actually starting to hesitate, right? We're bumping up to 2.4 million on the chart, but then here the last couple of days we're basically sideways, so it looks like we're sort of finding a bit of a trade range at the moment. It's almost 2.5 million for the sellers in Jita, 2.3 million for the buyers, and then if we go to the player owned trade hubs, look at that, we go down to less than 2.4 million, and I'm gonna guess we stay closer to 2.3. Yeah, exactly. So it's that 2.4 million to 2.3 million price range at the moment, with 2.4 winning out, it looks like, in the last couple of days. So the sellers able to dictate the price mostly. Slightly lower volumes are noticeable here as well, which could be interesting. Also definitely a pattern here, right? Lower volumes, higher price. Higher volumes were at a low price, and then here again, as we go up, you can see that the volumes are hesitating. So some activity, some position taking, I think, in the Plex market, but my personal read on this is that we still don't really know. Those keys for the nullsec banks still have to be brought into the game. How will that go? How easy or how difficult is it to actually get all of that risk into the game, and what will the impact then be on inflation, deflation? Pretty interesting situation where I'm reading just hesitation. Nobody really knows the direction CCP is taking, and if they're happy with this, or if they want more risk, if they want more inflation or deflation. They're really a little bit like a central bank when it comes to that, and at the moment they just don't really let us know much. They just announce lots of changes that are still in the pipeline, but exactly what's happening is a little bit of an unknown, which is, you know, pretty good for speculators, of course, but not too many willing to risk it in Plex, I would say. For the multiple pilot train certificates, yeah, we get a same move back up to the 1.25 billion range in the last couple of days, pretty much. So we're expecting to see sellers at around that range, yeah, 1.23 to 1.3 billion in GTA itself, and then buyers are slightly above 1.1 billion. So here again, sellers winning out, volumes down a little bit, and so yeah, basically people are forced to go to these sellers if they want to grab these multiple pilot train certificates, and it puts a little bit of upwards pressure on the price at the moment. Skill extractor is bound to be pretty much the same thing, yeah, just below 290, which honestly it's like the highest price we've had in almost 3 months, so that's not so bad. Still sellers coming in very quickly at 274. It's not that much, but it is there. In GTA it's 284 million, and the buyers are at 255 million. Although here within this is kind of weird, within the Tranquility Trading Tower they go up to 270. That's a super narrow margin. At the higher end of this range, let's see, not necessarily, down here somewhere. So a little bit of within Tranquility Trading Tower activity that if they put the range at 1, you know, it would probably have been picked up at the moment, right? It would have probably grabbed quite a few of these already, maybe push it down to like 267 or something like that. Pure speculation on my end, but you know, pushing a little bit away from these aggressive sellers as well. And these, I think you can just buy these from GTA, so that shouldn't be much of an issue. All right, next up, let's take a look at the impact on the injectors. Then we got quite a few skill points from the anniversary login event. I at least got a nice little boost on my main character, fully training all of the new fleet. The new fleet skills, so I could go with different formations and things like that if that were ever in the plans. So those are trained. So let's take a look at that. Large skill injectors still down, back down to that 1 year low point of 600 million ISK, but look at the volume response. Seems pretty easy that there's players looking at these large skill injectors and really trying to buy the low end, and for now 600 million seems to be heavily defended by the market. It's 603 million for the sellers, 577 for the buyers, and well, with these average prices, from time to time someone is selling at like the 580 mark or something like it, close to that in all likeliness. And yeah, those are definitely relatively cheap large scale injectors if you look at this full 1 year chart. On the other hand, it must also be acknowledged that CCP has been very generous for a pretty long time when it comes to skill points. There's like a little bit less of being proud of having a certain number of skill points. All of that is gone, which back in the days was definitely a big thing. Reaching 100 million, reaching 200 million meant you had stuck with the game for a long time. Now, of course, with the injectors and with the freebies that CCP gives out, that tends to be a lot less. So is this a good investment at this point? I think if you're buying below 600 million ISK, I do think so, but we have to acknowledge that CCP is not making it easy for this one to go back up in price at the moment. What would change that, in my opinion, I've said it before, is that CCP would come out with like really expansive skill book line, for something completely new to the game, which would then, in my opinion, best be like a horizontal expansion of something, which it was, for instance, for the Triglavians, for Edencom, stuff like that. But we will, of course, have to wait and see on all of that. Then these small skill injectors are back up a little bit. Yeah, again, weirdly enough, there's not as strong a correlation between large skill injectors and small skill injectors as I would intuitively expect. This one is at 124 million for the sellers, 116 for the buyers, and today's average price for some reason is managing to get close to the 130 mark, so that's definitely above 125. So interesting how the small skill injector chart does have its own little way of going through time, it seems. Then we get the daily alpha injectors, not really willing to go below 40 million on this one, which is still a reasonable price. I think 42 million for the sellers, 37 million for the buyers. A little bit of activity in Tranquility Trading Tower, most of this in Jita. In Jita we go up to almost 43. Well, it's right around the average for the year, I would say, with the first part here below 40 million, then a very nice couple of months where we were above 45 million, and now we're at around that 40 million range after another month up in the high ranges. So I think it's still pretty good, even for investors, right? This is investment worthy. If you manage to buy low, sell high here, and potentially here as well, if that's what you expect to happen, then this could still be pretty interesting. And I think whether it's just below 40 million, 45, or even close to 50 million ISK, that is still a range that is very doable for an alpha player to set himself as a goal and then to boost his character. So I really feel like we have to be honest, there was a little bit of panic when CCP said daily alpha injectors, right? Quite a few players gave the feedback that, you know, it's part of the slippery slope. You're now selling skill points directly to players, basically. But with this one, my personal feeling is that, well, they did kind of hit a very interesting niche there that does exist in the game. You know, not for every single player, not for every alpha player, right? A lot of them just, you know, use an alpha account to probably take a look at the game, see if they like it. But there's definitely a playstyle here with trying to get that 45-50 million, earn a daily alpha injector, boost your character, do so again, and enjoy, have a loop there that they seem to enjoy within EVE Online, considering, you know, how popular this is and how good in price it's doing compared to like the large skill injector. It's basically gone down for a year, and a small skill injector as well. So to me, very interesting that this is working so well. And then finally, we still have the hypercores that are also going back up a little bit. Now, is this going to stick, or are we just gonna start to move within a 250 to 260-ish range for the hypercores? That's really same thing I would say as with Plex. 263,000 for the sellers, 240,000 for the buyers. It's that same hesitation that I'm seeing with Plex, right? We don't really know, right? If you expect inflation, then this should go up in price. If you expect deflation, then this should go down in price. Right now, we're just, you know, hovering within a range. And the one unusual thing, right? We just noticed Plex high price, low volumes. For the hypercores, we get high price, high volumes. So that's kind of a weird one that does seem to move a little bit differently as well from Plex. But for me, both hypercores and Plex are like, what does the market expect, inflation or deflation? And at the moment, it just doesn't know. Next up, we've got the mineral market. That's coming in at 13.5. Let's take a look at that. I think we'll still be digesting the industry change for Tritanium. This was not unexpected. Pretty much announced that we would move to a lower range. And so here we are challenging the 5 ISK mark on the chart. We're talking, let's take a look at the JITA prices, of course. 511 for the sellers, 492 for the buyers. Definitely seeing a narrowing of the margin between sellers and buyers here around the 5 ISK mark. And well, this is normal in a new industry situation. We need less Tritanium to build our stuff, especially the big stuff, and as a result, you know, we could not have expected like 6 ISK to be defendable, to become once again become the average, I would say, where, you know, you could sell to okay price, you could hold on, wait for to reach 7 or something like that. It's entirely possible that it'll be 5 ISK, maybe even lower than that, for that new average price for Tritanium, which is a little bit unfortunate for high-sec miners, of course. But you know, this is a choice that CCP has made, and I think the market here, this downtrend is looks quite severe, but it was fully expected, right? We've got this period of high volumes where we went back to 7 ISK, and then everyone knew at one point CCP is going to change the blueprints, and this is when, you know, the reserves will be out there of all of the manufactured goods, and demand should really plummet, and that's exactly what we've seen over the last couple of weeks. For pyrite, we've got something quite similar, but landing on 20 ISK. So here I think usage was not expected to change that much, and so this sort of feels like, you know, a market that's anticipating things to come back to normal when it comes to pyrite. Usage 20.10 for the sellers, 19.20 for the buyers. Basically here we've got increased volumes for about 10 days or so, with maybe even sustained a little bit longer as well, while it was still possible to build battleships with only Tech 1 minerals, you could say. Same thing with carriers. All of that stuff drove the price up to 30-35 ISK, and now we're basically back on that normal from before all of these announcements and that rush in production. On the Mexalon chart, yeah, definitely quite severe as well. But look at how extreme the increase was during the month of April as well. Went up to 200 ISK. Very, very expensive. Was of course the ideal time to bring that stuff to the market, to sell it, to turn that into liquid ISK. And here we've got maybe a little bit, may look slightly like an overshot, but in my opinion, 75, right, where we start off right at the start of the year, actually a normal average regular price for Mexalon, and I would not be surprised if we stick to a price that's a little bit above that. 92 here for most sellers, 88 ISK for the buyers. That's still a bit of a premium on the historical average for Mexalon, and I think that that should still be your focus if you're mining in HiSec. But a very, very noticeable pattern, of course, where we had this slow burn up. As Mexalon is something that's needed in decent quantities in nullsec, because, you know, they can't really mine a lot of that for themselves, so they do need to grab that from HiSec, and it is a bottleneck, right, that they eventually do hit in their industrial processes. And then here we get that volume again rushing, and we want to build all the battleships, capital ships, everything that we can with the old blueprints, so that drove the price up here. Amazing premium. And then we've got, of course, the ride down now as you know, industry slows down. There's all of these reserves in the system now of the finished products. This is gonna take a little bit of time to fully digest. I'm personally a little bit surprised how you know, calculated it looks like the market is setting these prices, because this is what I would expect after all is said and done, right? Maybe 90 at the high end, definitely 75 or above, but not by too much, right? And then for pyrite back at 20-ish, also feels like that's where we would expect to be. And then titanium taking a little bit of a beating down to a lower range. So for the HiSec minerals, yeah, to me this feels like the market is really going pure logic here, and not doing like an overswing of, all right, no one is buying Mexalon at the moment, so the price has to crash down to like a 50 ISK or something like that, because there's all these battleships still out there. No, and there's still this, like, this is gonna be the long-term likely price, so let's stop here. Interesting. Then we've got Noxium that also, you know, went back. This is actually a pretty serious pullback from 2000 to almost 1500 ISK. Percentage-wise, this is quite impressive, but of course, this is also that same premium again that they have to give back from the month of April. And, you know, it's able to stay well above 1500. We're talking 1635 for the sellers, 1500 for the buyers. If you're feeling more adventurous as a miner, low sec for Noxium does seem to be pretty interesting. Oh, and then God damn it, I switched it here. Sorry about that, guys. Here is Isogen then, right? Much more violent upswing to 70 ISK on the announcement, but we all know that 2 billion units that has plagued us and kept the price in check well below 50 here for like 4 months on end. They're still out. They were still out there. Well, in all likeliness, a lot of these are still out there, and so this is why this was crushed very quickly, but maintained the price above 50. A little bit more careful selling from whoever was holding all of that Isogen. Now, of course, right, we've got the downtrend on the lower demand. You can see that from the volumes here as well. And so we're normalizing at 46 ISK for the sellers, 45 for the buyers, and I think this is still happening here, right? 90 million units, 138 million units, another 27, another 25, and there's still some big players holding a lot of Isogen that are trying to monetize that, turn that into ISK at the moment. Yeah, patience is not forever, and I mean, the system needs to chew through all of these Isogen reserves before we can get that same, in my opinion, that same mechanic where you know, it needs to come from low sec. That's a lot harder, so then it should go up in price. But for now, I mean, especially compared to how much isogen will be used at the moment. 138 million in a single sell order is something that'll satiate most of New Eden for a very long time. Unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately for industries, of course, because that means that isogen at the moment is still relatively cheap. Then we've got the Zydrine market that is taking a little bit of a beating. Very interesting, continuing the downtrend, going down to close to a 1-year low point, well below 1,000 disc. 843 in fact for the sellers and 815 for the buyers. Looking at this move, honestly, if you're planning to do some industry, stocking up on some Zydrine to me makes a lot of sense. And we also saw this massive mining amount that happened, I think it was in March in Nullsec. My read on that, yeah, a little bit of botting, some automation, maybe a little bit of like, really, we're gonna push for this because we're making a lot of risk with Zydrine, and then, you know, shooting yourself in the foot as you crash the price down from 2k down to 850 on just all of those supplies that have come online. And then we get the megasite market that's not able to hold on to 600 disc here, 580 for the sellers, 540 for the buyers. So a part of this downtrend for both Zydrine and megasite is also going to be just the lower usage, right? In my opinion, right? Carriers have been made, super carriers have been made. Right now it's a lot harder to do so, and so that's just going to slowly, you know, for the foreseeable future, I would say, is going to put a little bit of a damper on demand and thus keep these prices relatively low. And then Morphite should be doing fine. Yeah, it is doing fine, able to stay well above the 62,000 mark, 67 for the sellers and 64,000 for the buyers. Still very, very expensive. Yeah, Tech 2 is in vogue, I would say, and there's quite a bit of demand for Morphite just throughout the entire Tech 2 economy. Moving on to PI, coming in at 2135. Let's take a look at that. Now, I did, wasn't there a little bit of speculation that I read on talking in stations around that? Yes, there was that these changes to like warp core stabilizers and nullification could have their impact on PI. And actually need to drink here for a second. Gives me a chance to think. If I'm not mistaken, the perspective was that while you still have options for transportations, you're basically going to be a lot slower, because anytime you do come across a bubble, a trap or something like that, what you'll want to do is go to a safe spot, cloak up and wait for your cooldown times to come. And so big supplies come from like low and nullsec, of course, or even wormhole space. That's where you get really big yields potentially. High sec not so much. And so this could slow down transportation and does make PI a little bit more expensive, as supplies to high sec should become harder. I think that was sort of the rationale that I noticed there. I can kind of see that point, although I'm not really sure how often from like a low sec transportation you come across gate camps and things like that. But let's get started. Here are the broadcast nodes going for around 1.8 million, you know, basically fully recovered from about a year ago at 185 million, and then 175 for the buyers. Pretty expensive at the moment, you could say, looking at it from the last half year perspective, but nice comeback that has been sustained. And then the construction blocks next, those are not telling that story. It doesn't look like anyone is expecting construction blocks to be harder to bring to the market, as we are back down to the low end of 7,000, 8,000 for the sellers, but yeah, demand isn't there. We're back below 7k for that. Consumer electronics flat at the 7,500 mark, 7.8 for the seller, 7.3 for the buyers. It's basically still well below average. So there's obviously a difference between some advanced PI materials now needed in capital and super capital construction, and the refined PI materials that are basically still oversupplied. Here we've got coolants, right, a little bit of volatility, and we stabilize at 8,000, 8,300 for the seller, 7.8 for the buyers. That's decent. I mean, it's still low, right? 10,000 disc average for coolant has been my historical experience there, but no doubt that there's a little bit more fuel needed as well in the new industry, and as a result there is a little bit more demand for coolants. That's starting to up the volatility and up the average prices. cryoprotectant solutions actually going back down at the tail end. So sellers below 100,000, no, still not 102 for the sellers, but buyers dropping out slowly, and now you're buying cryoprotectant solutions potentially for less than 90,000 ISK. Honestly, again, I'm gonna say this, if you're seeing this pattern here, right, couple of bumps when most of the others just went straight down, it's a sign that this was an implant introduction. And I'll be honest, I'm probably going to invest a little bit of ISK at this point in some of these goods. Why? Well, all of a sudden CCP comes out with, we're changing nullification and we're changing the what's it called, warp core stabilizers, right? This is something that comes completely out of left field. I would not be surprised if some implants are on the menu then, right? This is not like too logical a progression for industry, right? Which was sort of the hint that I got from the live stream when they first announced all of this stuff. No, this is really, all right, we've got lots of teams working on lots of stuff. So I would not be surprised. I think that I do want to get ready for an implant move at some point as well. Then we've got enriched uranium, time to fuel, so a little bit of a comeback, but still well below average. 9,000 for the sellers, 8,600 for the buyers. Does feel like that's a little bit more normal as well, right? Coolants, easy to produce on gas plants, going for 8K. Enriched uranium, much harder to produce, going for 9K. But also normal average for enriched uranium at, say, 12,500 or something like that. So the highest point of the year is my historical experience, that's the normal price for uranium. So yeah. Integrity response drones, a little bit of an anomaly here in a data point up to 5 million ISK, but the average still just below 2 million, 1.94 and 1.8 for the buyers. Definitely also recovered and able to defend that price easily. Mechanical parts tied to fuels, also super easy to produce on barren planets. So 8K for the sellers, 7,000 for the buyers. That's the situation. Nanites should have bought like last week or 10 days ago when we were well below 5,000 ISK. You can see here tied to implants, 6 for the sellers, 5,000 for the buyers. Yeah, last week or 10 days ago, could have bought this for well below 5,000 ISK, and now we're back up. Look at the volumes as well. I would not be surprised if a little bit of position taking, just like what I want to do at this point, has already taken place. Nano factories able to stay close to 900. Yeah, 905,000 for the sellers, 850 for the buyers. Organic motor applicators also 900,000. So away from bottom, it's actually 860 and 840 for the buyers, first buyers. So super narrow margin here, but it's a recovery. Although I think historically speaking we're well above $1 million for the average price, so these still have a little bit of to go if you're looking for the full recovery, which broadcast nodes for instance are getting very close to, but overall advanced PM materials are doing a little bit better. Recursive computing module, another strange data point at 10,000 ISK. Let's see if I can get the chart here. 1.4 million almost for the sellers, 1.2 for the buyers. Partial recovery, not a full one. And robotics for fuels, that feels sort of strange because it takes a little bit more to make robotic specialized PI materials. Tied to fuels, I would expect demand here to pick up a little bit, but price wise, no, we're still down to almost 60,000, 61,000 for the sellers, 60,000 for the buyers. So very aggressive buying here as well, but very aggressive supplies as well. Going up to 65,000, but that's still, I mean, nowhere near the 8K that you get for even something like coolant. So this does surprise me a little bit. Self-harmonizing power cores, 1.75 million. In fact, 1.8 million and above for the sellers, 1.7 and above for the buyers. So also recovered and able to stay there. Sterile conduits, actually a little bit of volatility here at the tail end. Not sure if it wants to get close to 1 million or well away from that. Yeah, it looks like 1.35 million almost for the sellers and 1.2 million for the buyers, and not enough supplies at the moment to fully satiate the market, leading to some volatility in sterile conduits. Ukomi superconductors, right? Implants yet again. Buyers at 63, sellers at 75. yeah, maybe buying below 65 and get that as a reference point. I was hoping to at some point buy below 50k. That never really materialized. And then we get with our mainframes, 175 on the chart, 167, so below 1.7 million for the first couple of sellers. Bit of aggressive selling happening here, but just closing the margin to buyers. So I don't think a crash is in the books here just yet for PI, at least for the advanced PI materials. When it comes to the other stuff, like construction blocks, all of the refined stuff does seem to be still super abundant, and here, pullbacks are never out of the question. Next up, advanced move materials, 30 minutes. Let's take a look, as always, at the carbides first. Here is crystalline carbonite for Galente, and last week it had fully normalized back to 150, which is maybe slightly above average, but was basically on its average, and then the market says no, going back up in price towards 200, 210 in fact for the sellers, 195 for the buyers. So we're back at the carbonite premium even for Galente, and volatility absolutely here in the market. And the king of volatility is Caldare, so that's titanium carbide down here. That is giving back some ground, but look at the high points here. Double top at 350, very, very expensive for something that a year ago only cost 150. ISK at the moment we're basically also settling back on the low end of the current chart, which is still 250 for the sellers and 230 for the buyers. So even this pullback is still very expensive, and I would not be surprised if we're going back up, because right now I would say that we're supply locked. This is just high prices, supply comes in, it does a little bit too much as always, crashes the price back down, but still never below the averages, and then supplies dry up, as no one wants to sell at those prices when there's a much higher potential, and so we get this cycle that is creating a little bit of volatility in the system. Then we get ferrite carbide for Minmatar, that's just a little bit more stable, but look at this, today's averages back up to 200 ISK, which means 209 for the sellers, 199 for the buyers. So even here it does happen, although it seems like it's a little bit slower, right? We do have the double top up to 200 as well. Then we get a pullback to 175, but we were here for almost a month, just hovering around this range, but now right here at the tail end, back up to 200, probably on just no more supplies coming in. We'll see that opportunity again of 200 and above, so supplies are expected to bring us back down to 175, but the higher range is easily sustained by the carbides. Now we get tungsten for a Mars, same double top, well above 250. We went down here again as well, below 200, and we're back at 220 for the sellers, 205 for the buyers. So this does seem to be a little bit of a cycle that's happening at the moment in the carbide related markets. For the metamaterials, let's take a look at those. Photonic metamaterials, actually finally this feels to me like it's a little bit of a trend break, and we are going back up. Start of the year was well above 15,000. Right now we are selling at 14,000. Buyers coming up at 1250. Took a long time, but to me it feels like the metamaterials are starting to feel that pressure as well and are starting to recover. Then we've got the Caldari ones, probably more volatility, and we actually have early spike here up to 35k, so this chart feels a lot better. But even here in the last week or so, we're definitely going back up from an average price of just above 20k to 22.6, so that's a 10% increase pretty easily. 22,750 for the sellers, 22,100 for the buyers. Basically another recovery, I would say. And then we get for Minmatar the plasmonic metamaterials that are also back above 20k. Same thing over the last 10 days or so. Couple of sellers coming in just below that, but 18,000 for the buyers. So here again feels like a recovery is in the works. And then we get there's metamaterials for Amar also going back up here above 17.5. I think that's an important note here. 18,000 for the sellers, almost 17,000 for the buyers. Feels like it's back slightly above that price point, which is still not a historical average, but that recovery is starting to come in here. So very, very interesting. We did not see a big response to anything that was happening here in the carbides, in the metamaterials, but I think it is finally starting to come through. Then we've got the other advanced move materials with fermionic condensates, unfortunately dropping back to the low end of its range. 64k for the sellers, 61k for the buyers. That's definitely kind of cheap. Then we've got ferrogel. You can see the pressure mounting here again. So anything directly related, I'm going to say, to Tech 2 ships, Tech 2 items, does feel like it's in a super high demand. But then once you get into some of the other intermediaries, that seems to me like it's struggling with oversupply at the moment. So 33,400 to 32,400 definitely doesn't feel like too strong a position at the moment, right? A bit of pressure at the tail end here. They tried, a lot of them tried, but just not sustainable. Here is Fullerite, right? Tried to get back above 1,000 disc, doubled up at 1250, and now here we're sliding back slowly down below 900 for the sellers, 875 for the seller, 875 for the buyers. So here a little bit of buying, right? Not willing to crash us back to 500 or anything like that, but definitely not able to sustain any of the big gains that we've seen. And then the volatility is there though. So here is hypersynaptic fibers. You can see this one did not pull back. It was in fact back down to 9k again for about a month. And here at the tail end, close to 1 year high point all of a sudden, almost 13,000 for the sellers, 11,000 for the buyers. But it's that same question, right? How long will this last? Looking at everything else, honestly, I don't expect it to last too long. So this is your sell opportunity for hypersynaptic fibers. If you're able to bring product to the market efficiently and quickly, you could still try to bring it in and try to take advantage of these higher prices. But I expect that you won't be alone. And I personally do expect that we'll pull back decently quickly. Nano transistors, able to stay above 5,000 ISK, 5,150 for the sellers, 4,700 for the buyers. But look again, on one single page, we go from 5,300 down to 5,150. Aggressive selling does seem to be the response to these higher prices, and then that creates this, even if we get to 2,000 ISK. For phenolic composites, we decently quickly go back down to 1850 for the sellers, 1730 for the buyers. So a lot of a much higher difficulty for these items to maintain any of their gains here. A bit of pressure here again in ceramic fibers, although able to. This one is that one exception. That one has clearly was clearly moved back to a 500 disc average range. I think this was like directly needed in some of the blueprints for some of the capital stuff. That there was a change there. That was just, we're gonna need more of this. But even this one, a bit of pressure here. 475 for the sellers, 415 for the buyers. Still a nice premium on what was happening in the first part before April. Late February actually, when we got this move up, but I think it's just more needed at the moment, if I'm not mistaken. Then we've got the Tech 2 ships coming in at 3730. I do think here that there's still volatility possibilities, especially in Caldari. So here's the Basilisk, went up to 1 year high point of almost 300 million ISK, very expensive of course, and then eventually supplies do come back. And look at that, we're back down to 242 for the sellers, 210 for the buyers. That's like a 40-50 million pullback here all of a sudden. But we're still above the averages, and this is gonna be, I think, the trick for those people that love to speculate in Tech 2 ships, finding those new bottom ranges. That's gonna be difficult to do, but that's gonna be the exercise that I think in the upcoming months we're gonna have to try to make in Eve Talk if we're gonna try to trade in Tech 2 ships, which I personally do enjoy trying to do, because they've got nice charts. Generally speaking, not all of them, but they do. Then we've got the Cerberus, was also, peaked up to 350 million, very expensive. Some supplies coming online, but not really willing to push the price down that much. Still 294 million for the sellers, 259 for the buyers. That margin is opening up, so I do think that we're setting ourselves up for a pullback in the Cerberus as well. But again, should we buy below 250? Should we buy below 220? That's a complete unknown at this point, and something to look out for. Then we've got the Guardian. As I've said, it's not across the board, especially the MR ones in my experience have been much more stable, right? So a steady crushing down of the price and decline with like a 180 average range here in December, January. Then we've got basically a two-step back up to higher price, but you can see this is not tradable volatility, except for that one spike here and then one slight spike here. Other than that, it's very, very difficult to say, all right, we're gonna buy low, sell high, trade this quickly. That just doesn't happen that often for the Guardian. It's selling for 230 for most, 210 for the buyers, and then one seller here at 224 I think is just going to get absorbed pretty quickly. Where you've got a better chance, I would say, is the stealth bombers. Here's the hounds. So this was that one spike that I talked about when everything else, almost everything else, had these uptrends, right? The stealth bombers were clearly lagging behind. You could have bought these for less than 25 and then sold for well above 30. At the moment, we're in that pullback phase, 28 for the sellers, 24 for the buyers. These will normally, we have to be careful when it comes to this, but at the moment it looks like stealth bombers will be able to get the nullification module fit. So that means that you can make this bubble immune at this point. They've got a cloak, so with a little bit of patience, you can basically get through all bubble traps as well with this one. It's an interesting change that could definitely have its impact on the market as well, but I'd be very careful, right? Is that something that's actually going to come true? We will see. All of that is definitely still subject to change and very speculative, but something to keep in mind. So stealth bomber 28 and you're buying below 25 million, honestly doesn't feel like a bad place if you want to ride the next potential wave up. Then we get the Gitursa for our eye on the Triglavian price range and volatility. I mean, here, look at that. These daily data points, daily averages all over the place, from a high of 900 million and a low of 750. We're talking 930 for the sellers, 750 for the buyers. Very, very high range between these two. Not sure what that means. Not what I was expecting, honestly. Let's take a look at the Ishtar next, going back up in price. Kind of weird, because the general consensus here was that a lot of Ishtars were used by bots or are used by bots in nullsec, and they have lots of warp core stabilizers in the low slots, just to improve their chances of getting their automatic warp going. And as a result, one of the changes is that this will cut your bandwidth down by 50%. But I guess they're just saying that the bots are gonna roll with the punches here, and that the Ishtar market can do what it wants at the moment. 264 for the sellers, 243 for the buyers. Definitely a nice high point if you bought a couple of months ago. Then we've got the Manticore, right? Same volatility here that we were talking about, a little bit behind on the entire market. We're in the pullback phase yet again. 30 million on the chart, 30 for the sellers, 28 for the buyers. And here it's that same question, right? Do we go back down to 25 at some point? Or are we talking about a lower price point for us to try to buy at? Munin able to maintain a decent premium, but back down below 250. 238 million for the sellers, 236 for the buyers. Not much to say. This is basically the increased price cost that's showing up here, I think. Then we've got the Nemesis, right? Definitely the one with a very nice potential as well. Super noticeable, below to 22.5 on the charts. Try to buy. I think you could have bought these below 20 million at one point here as well. And then we had that spike happen up to 30 million. So a bit of a slower pullback. 27.5 for the sellers. We are already buying below 25 million. Again, this is really gonna be another cycle of discovery in Tech 2. I can't really get a good read on that market just yet, and finding those price points again where I would say, buy. You should definitely make ISK on that. For the last year was pretty easy. Buy close to 20 million. You were looking pretty damn good. And look at the potential, right? This is a nice, decently good chart to do a little bit of trading in. But will we reach these lows again? That's difficult to say. Then we've got the Oneros, right? Definitely able to defend its premium now after a couple of nice spikes here of volatility. This was before a period where it was just bad news, bad news, bad news across the board. And I always said, look at the volumes as well. Very difficult to trade into this one. But during this time, there's definitely some money made, especially if you followed my tip. I think only one, right? Only one, sell high, buy low, sell high, buy low. It should be easy to do with just a single Oneros compared to, let's say, a dozen of them. Volume spikes were there all of a sudden. So this was an opportunity, and now we're back at a high point. At the moment, 210 for the sellers, 195 for the buyers. Do we see a pullback? I think we could definitely see that, but this is again the same question, right? Before all of this, below 160, quite noticeable, right? That seemed to be a trigger two times, and then, but here now the next one, 180. Where is that new bottom? It's just impossible for me to tell at the moment. This is interesting. The Panther going back down to the 1.25 billion mark. Definitely still a premium from the start of the year, but feels a little bit lighter. Well, it's almost 1.4 for the sellers, 1.1 for the buyers. So this pullback is actually, in all likeliness, a little bit of impatience and some people dumping Panthers to these buyers rather than showing a pullback in production costs for Tech 2 battleships. The Purifier is doing something completely different from the other stealth bombers. It's just not pulling back. It's staying well above 30 million, 34 for the sellers, 28 for the buyers. So this is, you know, if you bought close to 25 or below 25, you still have a sell opportunity now for like probably 3 to 4 weeks straight. Interesting. Then we get the Scimitar, also able to maintain most of that premium, 213 to 220 for the sellers, 204 for the buyers. But again, volume-wise, gotta be a little careful here. And then we get the Widow, went down to, back up a little bit. So I would say here, above 1.5 billion for the sellers, 1.2 billion for the buyers about a year ago, right? We're looking at, are buyers below $1 billion? Yeah, sometimes not. This is that increased production cost, partly due to the Marauders, of course, becoming so much more popular. And then we've got the Zealot, that's just confirming the MR trend, I would say. Slow pullback. This is not exactly tradable volatility, unfortunately, but we're back at 235 for the sellers and 204 million for the buyers. Decent margin, terrible volumes on this one. MR is struggling. Caldari is king of volatility, and then it's also the bigger the ship, the harder, the smaller the ship, I think the easier to find volatility and opportunity. So yeah, very interesting Tech 2 market. Definitely something where we'll have to look at how everything evolves now that the first set of changes are in. It's basically the Marauder wave that has washed over this market, and then the real question is going to be, in my opinion, is CCP planning more changes to Tech 2 as well, now that they've basically done big changes to Tech 1? It's possible, so it's very difficult to say exactly what's happening here, but potentially that does mean a lot of profits when you can buy after serious pullbacks as well. Next up, Tech 3. Let's take a look at those at 47.25. So here, a little bit of speculation maybe again on the changes with the interdiction bubble or nullification, so where you're bubble immune and workhorse stabilizer, probably not that much of an issue here, but I think that this could go two ways. I think the changes were generally seen as a bit of a nerf to the cruisers, because, well, they lose that, take that subsystem, you can fly through bubbles, which the biggest problem with that is if you're using that for hunting, it's going to slow your hunting down substantially, because, well, you get to those cooldowns, and so, likeliness, right, you experience a bubble. What do you need to do? Get to a safe, then wait for your cooldowns. There's that aspect that's gonna play, and that generally was seen as a bit, I think, of a nerf to hunters, which can quite often happen in these cruisers. But very quickly we also started to see that, that means that CCP is going to have to change these cruisers, and so who knows what kind of changes CCP may do to these Tech 3 cruisers. Very speculative at the moment, I would say. But let's start with the tactical destroyers, where the Confessor is settling back below 50 million. I would say back to a normal price, 48 for the sellers, 45 for the buyers, 52 of them here, but other than that, nothing outlandish for supplies. So this feels to me like the Confessor is where it should be. Then we've got the Hecate, which was down below, no, still heading down to 50 last week and now was below 50 million. We're talking 51 for the sellers, 45 for the buyers, but we're also seeing decent supplies here. 50, 16 last 24 hours, putting a little bit of pressure here. This really feels like, yeah, this is okay in my opinion. A little bit of extra volume, I think a little bit of extra purchasing, push the price back up above 50 million. But this will be easily absorbed. As for now, everything feels quite in line. And here's the Jackdaw, right? Bit of buying on a dip, but other than that, we're basically at that just below 50 million mark. 49 for the sellers, 44 for the buyers. Last 24 hours, half a page, 39.12. None of this feels like it's gonna crash the market either. 50 million and just below seems to be the consensus for these most popular tactical destroyers, and the market is easily able to plug gaps. So I expect Hecate to see a little bit of extra supply, pushes back down decently quickly, could maybe give a little bit of breathing room back for who's the lowest here. Probably the Confessor, push that up maybe a little bit, but yeah, here there's 50 of them waiting, should all be quite doable. And then the Zwepel I expect like slightly lower. Yeah, this one is slightly lower, actually decently lower all of a sudden. 44 for the sellers, and you're buying below 40 million ISK. We still have a full page of supply. This feels like maybe that's an opportunity to try and snag a couple of cheap Zwepels. It's maybe worth the gamble, because eventually I do think that once enough happens in these three ships, and there's decent supplies still coming in here on any volatility, basically, right? Any big purchases, Nosek comes in and says we need a Hecate fleet, we need a Confessor fleet, we need a Jackdaw fleet, which can happen. Then you're gonna see a jump up here in this vehicle. It's still being supplied a little bit too much. Buyers are already below 40 million, and getting that up to 50 million shouldn't take that much when it comes to just, you know, activity here. So this is starting to look like a little bit too much of an imbalance for the least popular tactical destroyer, and that starts to me to feel like an opportunity. So yeah, if you manage to buy Zwepels below or close to 40 million ISK, I do think you're looking at a good purchase on basically any positive volatility in the other destroyers. So you've got a trigger, you've got an opportunity. Let's see if it ever happens. And then we've got our cruisers, of course. Here is the Legion, actually back in a normal range, I would say, for this one. 184 for the sellers, 168 for the buyers, lowering volatility around the current price range, so not a big move there. The Loki, after a price spike up to 250, is back at a high price, but it's also the most popular one. 195 million for the sellers, 180 for the buyers. Doesn't feel that outlandish. Proteus continued its downtrend back to also a normal price. I would say 172 for the sellers, 154 for the buyers for the least popular one. But the Tengu did jump back up to well above 200 million. But is already recovering. Supply is already filling that gap. So yeah, my read on this is that the market is waiting and seeing, actually. Except the Tengu did get that jump here. Volume wise, nothing too special. That one feels a little bit out of line, and is maybe what misled me into expecting some big moves across the Tech 3 cruiser market, because of course I did put that one down for the ticker. It was a decently significant move all of a sudden in the Tengu, but looks like I was wrong on that. It's definitely not across the board, and so the negative vibe could definitely still win out for Tech 3 cruisers, where their nullification modules become like next to useless unless CCP comes in and really revamps the ships. We'll see how that evolves. Would I take any positions on this? Let's see where the buyers of Protea, 155. Honestly, I'd still wait. I'd still wait for a better opportunity. Hopefully, you know, then the pattern that I would hope for, if you want to take a gamble in Tech 3, again, I'd only do so with a single hull, is some big negative speculation driving one of these back down. Let's say Proteus below 150 or something like that. Then, yeah, maybe buy one and hope for good news from CCP. But other than that, very difficult to say that I would make a move on the cruisers. And then finally the extra product. What did I want to take another look back at the Tech 1 battleships. At this point, right, we've been in the new situation for a little bit, and I kind of want to see how this is affecting that market. So standard battleships, let's start with Amar here. And so what has changed when it comes to, I think you can go here and then here, required input materials, right? We've got these extra components that have been brought in here. And so the story behind all of this was that generally when these minerals went up so much, let's go for titanium, right? During this price period here, lots of battleships being produced when it only cost minerals. After that, we've got this massive drop-off in demand, and we should, my thinking is, we should maybe see a little bit of a glut, a little bit of oversupply in these battleships as well, that had gained a lot of price points. But let's take a look here in the Abaddon. Very interesting. Definitely seeing some volatility during that April period where a lot was being produced, but move up 350, and we're currently talking 350 million for the sellers of the Abaddon, 328, 330 almost for the buyers. So that is the full premium being paid at the moment on the Abaddon. For the Apocalypse, we do have a little bit of a pullback right here after April. So that one is now going for still 345 million and 305 for the sellers. So maybe here speculation went a little bit wild, going up above 4 and even above 400 million on a day here. That was not too sustainable. So a bit of a pullback, but definitely from a super high price point. And then the Armageddon, that's interesting. 290 for the sellers, 268 for the buyers. Definitely a little bit less of being able to hold on to that premium, which the Abaddon has been able to do. So all right, interesting. I'm not spotting any massive oversupplies that have brought the price back down that would maybe constitute a buy opportunity. And here's the Raven, for instance, right, 350 and above. We're talking almost 400 million, 394 for the sellers, 336 million for the buyers. Though that margin opening up, that is interesting. Let's take maybe a quick look at this one. If we go here, and then can I do view in industry? View in industry, there it is. Like that. And so these are, of course, the extra that are still total estimated price of 316 million. Here 311, so total at 627 for a hull. That's at 360. Yeah, making these at the moment is very, very expensive, and what's keeping this in check is all of the reserves that have been built up in April. That seems to be the story, but the market, I think, has settled that 350 to 400 million, that's going to be a battleship price cost when all is said and done. And again, just like with the minerals, I'm maybe a little bit surprised by that, but for a lot of this, to me, it feels like Marcus already is really calculating, being very objective on this one, and saying that's the long term, and already settling at that price point. So here's the Rock, for instance, when above 400 is settling at that 350 to 400 range again, 376 for the sellers, 343 for the buyers. And then the Scorpion is a little bit less popular, I think. Yeah, exactly. Also costing a little bit less, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for production cost. 330 for the sellers, 283 for the buyers. Then on the Galente, I'd say PVE, pretty popular here. Dominic's, look at that, 352 for the sellers, 319 right back on there, right? We've got the premium, that's what you're paying for it, and apparently we're able to stay there pretty easily. The Hyperion falls back off a little bit, but again from a 450 high point price point as well, basically coming back 373, 333, that's again that 350, 400 price range. Megatron, a little bit less actually here, 336 for the sellers, 291 for the buyers, despite the fact that if we again take a quick look at the industry costs at the moment, it's going to be kind of ridiculous. I'm expecting 627 input, 340 output. So this is definitely stabilized by the rush in April, but there's no pullbacks here so far. Maelstrom, a first slight pullback, you could say, for the Maelstrom here. 290. First battleship below 300 million for the sellers, 236 for the buyers. So that's interesting, I would say. First one below 300 million. Tempest, though, staying at 400 million premium. And then the Typhoon is 3 to 350. So Minmatar a little bit less popular, and maybe the only one where it seems to have happened that maybe we're just like oversupplied at the moment, where there's too many people that have made Maelstroms and are trying to sell Maelstroms, and now this one is going for well below 300 million ISK. We'll take a quick look as well here at the industry current cost, which is going up to, again, that 627 million. So it's not like the Maelstrom input cost is that different from all of these other battleships where we saw going for 350 to 400 million. So that may be our one opportunity, is that at the moment, if you grab a couple of Maelstroms below 300 million ISK or even below 250, I do think for the longer term that could be an interesting investment. May take a long time to materialize, right? Because there is all of that extra stuff out there that is causing it. But across the board, right, for the battleships, the consensus price for most of these seems to be well above 350 or around that 350 million mark. And so it's the only one here really that's standing out as being a battleship that costs less than 300 million and at 236 for the buyers. So for your consideration, looks like they may have overdone it a little bit in the Maelstrom production rush. And yeah, that's going to be it for this Eve Talk, guys. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.